This lesson we're going to be solving quadratic equations by graphing and by factoring. So let's look at graphing first. A function that can be written in f of x equals ax squared plus bx plus c is your quadratic function. It's a function because it has f of x, which is the same thing as y. The next one, it says an equation that can be written ax squared plus bx plus c is 0 equals 0. This is a quadratic equation, so there is a difference. One has a y, the other one doesn't. It equals 0. But they're very similar. All right, so the graph is shown to the right. You're going to be finding the x-intercept, 0, solutions, roots, factors. They kind of all really mean the same thing. We've kind of discussed it before. So it says if we have the same function, blank are located at negative 3, 0, 1, 0. If you notice, those are your x-intercepts. The x-intercepts are the coordinate points where your graph intersects the x-axis. The next part, we have our function. It says f of x. It's located at negative 3, 1, negative 3, and 1. These are called your zeros. So your zeros are the x values of your x-intercepts, which means when y is 0, that's what those values will be. Then whenever you have x plus 3, x minus 1, notice it's the opposite. Those are called factors. So notice the sign is the opposite of your zeros. This is different, but also similar. Notice we're still looking at negative 3 and 1, but notice this is an equation that's equal to 0 instead of f of x, which is y. So these are called solutions. And the solutions are the x values when your y is 0. Another name for solutions are roots. So the roots are also negative 3, 1, and a root of a quadratic equation is another name for your solution of the equation. Okay, so to solve a quadratic equation by graphing, we're going to be finding the x-intercepts of the related function f of x equals ax squared plus bx plus c from its graph. So your first step is to set your quadratic equation equal to 0. Then you're going to graph it. Now we're going to use a calculator. In y1, you're going to type in the left side of your equation. In y2, you're going to type in the right side, which should be 0, because remember, you're setting it equal to 0. After you do that, you're going to do second calc, and you're going to use number 5, which is intersect. Once you've done that, you're going to press enter 3 times. Enter, enter, enter. Okay, once you have that, you should see on your calculator intersection, and it'll give you your intersection point. All right, so we're going to find all real solutions, so we're not going to be dealing with any imaginary solutions by graphing. So first step is to set it equal to 0. So I first have to subtract 6x. So that's x squared minus 6x plus 8 equals 0. So remember, we're going to type in the left side in y1. I'm going to type the 0 in y2. Now my calculator, it won't show up on the video. And then the one on the iPad isn't finding intersections. So you're just going to have to follow along. So if you have your calculator, you're going to do second, after you've typed it into y equals, you're going to do second calc or trace. You're going to choose number 5 and then press enter 3 times. You're going to have to find both of your intersection points. So you're going to have to repeat that. So on this one, it's going to intersect at 2, 0 and at 4, 0. So your x-intercepts should be 2, 0 and 4, 0. We're just sketching it. Okay, so I'm finding my solutions. Remember, your solutions are just your x values. So x equals 2 and x equals 4. So we solved the quadratic equation. We were trying to find x, and we solved it by graphing. You found your two intersection points, your two x-intercepts, and then you can easily check this by plugging it back in. I would suggest plugging it back into the original just in case you made a mistake getting to this point. So you could plug in a 2, the left side on x, and then the 2 on the right side with x. It should be equal, and then same thing with the 4. Okay, so next one, we need to set it equal to 0, so we would have x squared minus 9 equals 0. So remember, if you go to y equals top left on your calculator, you're going to type in x squared minus 9, and then your right side y2 into 0. Again, my calculator's not going to show up, so you're going to have to follow along. You do second calc number 5, press enter 3 times. It should give you your intersection for one of them, so you would have to repeat that to find the other one. So -3, 0, and 3, 0 would be your 2. So your solutions would be x equals -3 and x equals +3. So this is how we can solve a quadratic equation graphically. Set it equal to 0 first, plug it into y1, y2, find your intersection point. Make sure you have to repeat this step, and you might have to move your cursor to both sides depending on which one you need to find. So if you're finding the left one first, make sure your cursor's on the left side, and then you might have to move your cursor to the right side in order to get that other x-intercept. If you have any questions on the calculator part, just come in and I can help you with it. Let's take a look at the back. So we're doing the same thing. So we'll need to set it equal to 0. So I need to subtract 14x over, add 49 over, plug it into y1, y2. This one actually only has one x-intercept. The majority of the time, you're only going to have, or you're going to have 2. But sometimes when you solve a quadratic, you only have 1. That would mean that your vertex is your x-intercept. So this happens to be 7, 0 for your x-intercept, which means your solution, there's only 1 on this one, x equals 7. And remember to check it. You could always plug it back in for your x's on your original. Make sure the left side equals the right side. So a great way of checking it. Okay, so notice part D, it's already in the form that we want it. We want it set equal to 0. It's already there. So we're going to go straight into plugging this into y1, this into y2. And then second calc number 5. So your left intercept is -6. And then your right one ends up being -2.5. So your x-intercepts and remember your solutions are the x values. So x equals -6 and -2.5 if you want to write it all together. So again, we're solving the equation. We're trying to find x. This is solving by graphing. Okay, so there is another way of solving quadratics. There's lots of ways, actually. So we're going to solve the quadratic equation using a table. So when we're using tables, you're finding your x-intercept. So anytime you have an x-intercept, remember that means your y value equals 0. So that's what you're going to be looking for. So it says the table is representing this quadratic function. you're going to use the table to determine the real solutions of your equation as h of x equals 0, which means y equals 0. So you're going to be looking for that. Notice y is 0 here. But we should end up with two solutions. So if you notice the pattern here, that you're jumping from a positive 8 to a negative 5, which means you're going to have to be touching 0 at some point in between those two. So I know one of my solutions would be x equals negative 2. And then I know my next solution would be somewhere between 2 and 3. So you actually don't know the exact. So we'll just, this means approximate. So you're just having to look at it. Sometimes you can see both of them, sometimes you can't. Excuse me. So that's just looking at a table, looking at your y value of 0. And then sometimes you might be in between two of your x values. So just pay attention to that. Let's flip on over. Now we're going to be solving by factoring. So whenever we are using factoring, you're going to be factoring the non-zero, which means the side that doesn't have a 0. So you're going to factor the non-zero side of the equation if possible. Then you're going to use the zero product rule. That just means that if a times b equals 0, that means either a has to be 0 or b has to be 0. So you're just setting each one of those equal to 0 to find your solution. So this is called the zero product. I call it rule, property, same thing. All right, if a quadratic equation factors, once you get your factors, you're then setting each piece like we did up here. A equals 0, B equals 0. We're going to set this one equal to 0, and then we're going to set this one equal to 0 to actually find your two solutions. So first step is to set your quadratic equation equal to 0. Then you're going to factor your non-zero side, and then you'll set each one of your factors equal to 0 to solve. So first step is to set it equal to 0. Now, if you're using factoring, there is a certain side. You always want your x squared term to be a positive. So if it's not a positive, that's the side you want. You want to move it away from that. So always check your x squared. Notice my x squared is positive, so I don't want to move that. I want to move everything else. So I'm going to subtract 28 and add 7x to both sides. Make sure you put it in standard form, so x squared first. Notice we can combine the x's. That's going to be a negative 3x, and then minus 28 equals 0. All right, so now we're going to get into factoring. First step with factoring is a greatest common factor. Notice they do not have anything in common. Then you check to see how many terms. We have 3 terms, so we always use sum and product when we have 3. Sum is the middle, so negative 3. Product is your outside. That's a 1 times negative 28 is a negative 28. So we want to find two numbers that add to negative 3 and multiply to negative 28. That would be a positive 4 and a negative 7. We don't have to use the swing method because that's a 1 in front, so you would just divide each one by 1. You would get the same exact thing. So once we have factored, we are then setting each piece, each factor equal to 0. Because then we have linear, these are linear factors, and then we can solve it. So that would be x equals negative 4 and x equals positive 7, because you add 7 over, you subtract 4 over. So there's my two solutions, negative 4, positive 7. So this is solving a quadratic equation by factoring. Okay, so part B, we're going to do the same thing. We're solving by factoring. So first step, set it equal to 0. Notice it's already there. So I'm going to go straight into factoring. First, I look to see if they have a greatest common factor. Notice they do not. So if it's a trinomial, I use sum and product. Sum is the middle number, so 13. Product is what you get when you multiply the outsides. This was a 1 over here, so we just got negative 28. But this is a 2, so 2 times 21 is 42. So we want to find two numbers that add to 13 and multiply to 42. So that would be 7 and 6. Now, notice we're not getting what we started with. When we multiply the first two, we don't get 2x squared. So we, remember, have to use the swing method. Divided by 2. Reduce if possible. If not, swing the 2 in front. So 2x plus 7 for that one. We can reduce this one to an x plus 3 equals 0. So once I have factored it, I'm setting each piece equal to 0. So I know this one's going to be negative 3. This one you might need to work out. Subtract 7 and divide by 2. So you get x equals negative 7 over 2. So there's your two x values. So again, same thing on the graphing part. You can always check a quadratic equation by plugging it back in for your x's, making sure that it equals 0. All right, looking at part C. First step is to set it equal to 0. So notice my x squared term's positive, so I want to subtract the 3 over. Okay, so notice they don't have anything in common, so I go straight into sum and product. Sum is 14. Product is negative 15. So that would be a positive 15 and a negative 1. Notice in front is a 5, so I'm not finished. I need to divide it. So that's x plus 3. Swing the 5 in front to make 5x minus 1. A lot of students stop here. You are trying to solve it. You need to know what x equals, so you have to go another step and set it each factor equal to 0. So that's x equals negative 3. If you need to, solve this one. The other one would be positive 1/5. So again, this is solving a quadratic equation by factoring. All right, last one. So it's already set equal to 0. Notice they don't have a GCF, so I go straight into sum and product since it's a trinomial. So sum is 8, product is negative 48. So that would be a positive 12 and a negative 4. Those add to positive 8, multiply to negative 48. Notice in front that's a 1, so I don't necessarily have to use the swing method, but I get the same thing. So make sure you set each piece equal to 0. So x will equal negative 12 and 4. Also, if you think back when we were graphing, remember your factors are always the opposite of your actual solutions. Notice that's what happens whenever we set it equal to 0. That's why they're the opposite. Okay, so we talked about how to solve a quadratic equation by graphing. Just find the x-intercepts. And then we looked at a table, so just look for your x-intercepts, which means y is 0. And then the other way is factoring. So those are a couple of ways of solving a quadratic equation. Remember to check it. You could always plug it back in for your x value at the end and make sure that it's a true statement. If you have any questions, let me know.